Good evening, everybody. Dear friends and supporters of the Käte Hamburger Center Law as Culture, I'm glad to see you back again. Dragi Petar, dobro nam došao u našemu centru pravo kao kultura. So this is very difficult to translate. It means just a welcome and nothing else. Der Begriff der Disziplin, den Weber eigens in seine Kategorienlehre aufnahm, kann auf verschiedene Weise bestimmt werden. And what he has done is to go back to a notion, discipline, so suspicious for most of us. The suspicion has been thrown by way of pedagogical theory, has been thrown on us by way of the invention of a disciplinary society by Michel Foucault, and had been preluded, however, in the context of an analysis of Macht und Herrschaft by Weber, who made a central category of it. And so, when announcing this conference by Petar Bojanić, I took the liberty, and he didn't punish me for that, to change just a little bit by introducing inverted commata into the announcement of his talk, that the discipline should be taken as a category and then brought into a context, la discipline institutionnelle. So don't be afraid, he won't speak in English, in French, though this is the common language in between us, but in English that might be more easy for most of you and me and a lot of people in this circle, though perhaps he might change where it is necessary. So this kind of resistance to discipline as an analytical, positively way to see the world, instead of this, he, according to his announcement, and very astonishingly, he wants to sell the concept of discipline as an indispensable feature, structure, condition of social life. A praise for discipline could be another title for this talk. And there is some of us may be shuddering what kind of authoritarian thought he will present to us, though perhaps in another way, if we take the formulations about discipline in the context of the military sphere, in the context of pedagogical undertakings, Nourishan and others, perhaps discipline is very much linked with some elements of civilization, and civilization might even be another way to speak about discipline if we think at some theories of the discipline that is introduced by the process of civilization as a control of sentiments, an inner control, so with regard to the inner side of the man of modernity. Perhaps it's even a feature of modernity as such. If we look at the Betriebskapitalismus, where we can't imagine modern economy without discipline, it's perhaps one of the main features, and some elements, as at least in the Bavarian context, where comes the discipline from? It comes from, and cannot come from, other sources for a Bavarian perspective than from religious ones. And as we know, it is the relationship of Protestant ethics and the spirit, I would say in this time, of the discipline. Ibn Durkheim, as you know, who didn't work with the Bavarian paradigm, unfortunately, it would be much more interesting to read him sometimes, or the other way around for Weber also, brought the category of discipline into the context of morality. Discipline is one central element of any kind of morality. This is very lightly forgotten because we think that discipline is such a horrible thing and can't imagine that it's even linked with something that comes not only from the outside, but that has to do with obligation, inner obligations, as we see autonomous morality today. But for Durkheim it was different. So there are a lot of reasons to rethink our relationship with the category of discipline, I suppose. And I'm very, very keen to know much more about this. So Petar Bojanić is known to most of us in this room. He has been a fellow at the center before. Now he's currently, again, a fellow, but he's also somebody who is directing an institute for philosophy and social theory and the Center for Ethics, Law and Applied Philosophy at Belgrad. He's the inventor and the director of a Center for Advanced Studies, the Southeast Europe Center for Advanced Study, CAS, at the University of Rijeka, where I'm very proud to be part of the scientific committee at this center, holding just in 2 weeks or 3 weeks a great conference about institutions. And this is one of the main focuses of Petar, who is a philosopher. So what the philosophers are melting themselves in all sociological stuff. They're doing this since a certain time, 7 decades, by way of social ontology. And the social ontology is sometimes very close to the sociological understanding of the social world that sociologists would always refuse to have any kind of relationship with an ontic sphere. Of course, this can't be possible because of the constructivist's character of the social world, as most socialists would say, and sociologists, by the way, also. But what is interesting, the background philosopher, what kind of philosopher? There is a specific philosophy behind, and this comes from Derrida, if I see right, as one of the main sources of his inspiration. And you might say, yes, Derrida, and this is always, for some of us, the poor and pure sociologists, a little bit difficult deconstruction, what it really means and so forth. But when you listen to him and when you will speak with his friends, as Peter Eisenman, for example, last year around the conference about abstraction, you will see and understand that deconstruction has to do with the other side of construction. And who is the constructioner in the world? It is the architect. That's why Peter Eisenman is the right address to understand what deconstructivism is. And that's why the debate with him was so interesting. So here at our center, he will continue with his studies about the normative power, the deontic power with and in institutions. This is a very, very, very fascinating topic for most of us, and the role that the normativity and the normative power plays in the institutional complex. A very complex and difficult notion of institution. It was something some 100 years ago for everybody talked about institutions without defining too much, but we have a lot of problems with that today to understand what institutions are and how they work and how they think, perhaps also, as some anthropologists say. So this is his topic. He will continue and to write a book where we hope that it will be published at our center. Some other informations for you, and then I come to an end. Really, I will take more of your time. In order for you to know what kind of books, articles, that's too much, it's too many pages, I can't read it all, but perhaps the last books. Violenza e Messianismo, Violence and Messianism. I don't know if this is possible in English, I don't know. Violence et Messianisme, Force and Forms of War, and this also should be understood that for a long time you are involved in philosophical access to understanding what it is about the war as in terms of social ontology. Frontiers, Knowledge, Sacrifice on the Last War. It was published in 2009 in Belgrad. Friend and Enemy, his first book, not completely unfamiliar to us, über Freund und Feind. Jacques Derrida and Carl Schmitt. I think this has been your dissertation, if I remember well, something of that kind. If not, you will correct me. And I can't go into the very manifold and far-reaching articles that you had published, and having looked a little bit closer into that, I'm even more fascinated by the wide range of interests, and however, to see the red line that is always has to do with collective memory, with responsibility, with the role of the war and the role of violence, and what law, normative structures, institutions can do, and perhaps sometimes also discipline, to bring a better world. If that is imaginable for you, I don't know. I would like to know better after your talk. So it's your turn. Thank you very much that you have come over to us, and that you will be presenting a paper just 2 days or 3 days after a huge conference where you were responsible in Belgrad, with more than 50 participants speaking and so forth, a huge event. But thank you for being with us, and we're listening to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Good evening. There's no PowerPoint. I'd like to read slowly some quotations. And I promise to say something about this title in French, for which, as always, the responsibility lies with Werner. Every time I have spoken at Käte Hamburger colleague, my titles were in fact chosen or amended or made better by Werner. Can I say that this is disciplining, that he pressured me or punished me in this or that way, thus simultaneously setting the limits of discipline, etc. Fach, for example, and limits to discipline can also appear in this way by a sovereign decision, or a decision of sovereign. This is what I will speak about today, but first I would like to thank above all Werner himself, but also Raja, Nina, Daniel, as well as all my friends and colleagues at the center, fellows, and everyone here tonight. I'm always delighted to do work here in Bonn. Why discipline, and what is the issue or problem with discipline? First, what is my problem with discipline? It is certainly not tied to the title or Werner's challenges acts. I work with others. I am the UE director of 3 or 4 institutions, some of which I have created. I hold in my wallet several credit cards of these institutions and organizations. I'm subject to financial discipline, which is only an implication of juristische Disziplin. I account for every move. I'm controlled by auditors who follow and control the decisions and documents produced by these institutions, etc. In addition to that, I demand of myself and of those with whom I collaborate what can be termed as discipline. How is this? What is it that I am doing when I demand this, and how do I demand it? How do I utter this word? How do I order discipline or call for discipline? How do we construct the equivalent verb from the noun discipline, and what is its form in the first person plural imperative? How does it sound? How further might I describe someone's behavior as disciplined or undisciplined? On occasion, I send a letter or document called disciplinary warning or rappel à l'ordre, announcing a disciplinary action to a colleague. If the lawyers consider there to have been a breach of institutional discipline, this is the phrase from the title, discipline institutionnelle, or if a certain disciplinary responsibility has arisen. The title of the 6th century text usually described to Isidore of Sevilla or Seville, institutionum discipline, is usually translated in the plural as the disciplines necessary for the rearing of children. Institution here refers to education. Second, my problem, or this institution, my alternative institution in Bonn, I ought to finish writing my book on institution. A chapter on discipline is crucial, but why exactly is that? This is another question that also at some point should be mentioned and elucidated here. My last dilemma, although certainly not mine alone, refers to the attempt at positioning discipline or indiscipline. The word discipline laws appeared only in the 19th century, it's very late. Durkheim would use undiscipline within the first great institutional activity described rather well in the Genesis 11:1-9 Torah, where a group of people who speak the same language build the so-called Tower of Babel, or Babel, or Babel. Tower of Babel is, we can say, first institutional building. And what's happened there in this kind of architectural project? Since this is a very precise construction of joint or common work, a joint enterprise, a name or joint institution, in verse 4 in Genesis we read, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. So that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." I'm interested to what extent discipline, above all, is the condition of cooperation and coordination of joint work. That is to say, to what extent is indiscipline the cause of the demise of this great program and great edifice? Where is discipline? In the exact language of the group, in constant mobilization of a group or team. In English, you can find several times the vocative is constructed by saying, "Come, let us break the bricks, let us build," etc., etc. Is discipline a matter of obedience of the group, or to the group, or common learning and joint experimentation with new materials and discovery of new building discipline? They use brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Or is discipline to be found in a consensus regarding a common program or project? Of course, this example is very convenient because a discovery of indiscipline of this group of people, and thus a reason for the discontinuation of building, would de facto imply a science about, we can say, institutional rules and institutional discipline. There are some other reasons for which I think it is necessary to thematize the notion of discipline. This is also Durkheim's designation, notion, or la catégorie, the discipline, which is my, or rather Werner's variation on today's title, or discipline as Wortbildung. This is Otto Mauch, one, for example, one of the best book he wrote the book in 41, Der lateinische Begriff Disziplin, eine Fortuntersuchung, Freiburg. Allow me to now in detail and disciplined manner, why do I use this attribute, for example, disciplined manner? Why do I use this attribute and what does it mean at all? What does it mean, disciplined manner? List a few preliminary reasons or key inspiration points that could represent an introduction into thematization of the word or designation discipline today. I would begin from the quotation marks in the title that appear in the title or always when discipline is on our mouth, that often accompany the word discipline and imply the vagueness and uncertainty of this word. Georg Becker designates discipline a term. However, on the other hand, discipline with quotation marks is, his opinion is, ein belasteter Begriff. In one of his last texts, the text is Philosophy as a Humanistic Discipline, Bernard Williams uses the formula, this is his term, humanistic discipline, with quotation marks, and is quick to add that, I quote, "It is not just a question of a discipline as a field or area of inquiry. Discipline with quotation marks is supposed to imply discipline." Williams. Discipline in quotation marks that could obviously be differently understood and refer to several different interrelated protocols should now finally become discipline. In philosophy, continues Williams, there had better be something that counts as getting it right or doing it right, and I believe that this must still be associated with the aims of philosophy of offering arguments and expressing oneself clearly, aims that have been particularly emphasized by analytic philosophy, though sometimes in a perverse or one-sided manner. This text, Williams' text, has certainly initiated various polemics and doubts regarding the possibility of interdisciplinarity being disciplined, as well as whether it is at all possible to be in a space between disciplines. That is, whether there is a space beyond discipline or beyond the institution as such. The problem also occurs in the use of discipline and interdisciplinary among philosophers who do not belong to, for instance, to analytic philosophy. What kind of discipline, without quotation marks, is Derrida speaking about in a conversation with Florian Reza from 1987, when he says explicitly, I quote Derrida, "Ich bin für die Disziplin." In the text of the Humanities and the Discipline of Philosophy, Derrida, just like Williams, privileges the discipline of philosophy or philosophy as a discipline, and in a way that task it with disciplining other genres of knowledge and other humanities. That is the function of philosophy as a discipline. However, paradoxically, any rigorous and precise disciplining of the knowledge genre, or for example, philosophy as such, would necessarily lead to the formatting and regulating of some other domains of knowledge and various discursive models. Quotation marks circulate and are certainly not easily disciplined. Floating quotation marks immediately introduce the need to deduce a strict classification of the meaning of the word discipline, as well as a new kind of order of explanation. This would be following by the production of certain priorities in use of the category of discipline, and a new theory regarding the significance of the discipline in the construction of, for example, the institution or joint work of a group. This would constitute my intention today. Even though, paradoxically, there are only very few texts and doctoral theses that systematically thematize discipline. Okay, I found, for example, 15, between 23 during the Second War, during the Nazism, there are 6 incredibly good texts and theses, and well, to me it seems possible to demonstrate a fairly stable set of various models and variation over the course of centuries. I will enumerate these points, mostly follow dictionaries which ought to be consulted anew, as well as add some new interpretations of discipline. Disciplina, following the thesaurus linguae latine, that refers to learning, disco, learn. Doce or docere, discere is to learn, learning. Disciple is a follower, fellow, apostle, one who is influenced by doctrine. Doctrine is the property of the teacher, while discipline is the practice and exercise of the student. Disciplina has strictore sensus and latiore sensu. Strictore sensu in thesaurus actus, ratio erudiendi, docendi, institutio, educatio, studium, didascalia, and on the other side, latiore sensu, severitas, severa morum educatio, e paideia. In Forcellini's lexicon, disciplina is defined as the ratio vivendi et discendi. Proprie disciplina est ratio vivendi et discendi, quae discipulus traditur institutio educatio. Discipline could potentially be a translation of the Greek paideia. For example, Potomau defends this option, or of the Greek episteme, which is how Boetius uses it and translates episteme with disciplina, but also the Greek word matein, to learn, or mathesis, mathematics. Saint Thomas speaks of the equivalence of Aristotle's mathesis and discipline, that means mathematics, scientias, disciplinas, quod. In Hebrew, for example, discipline or obedience, mishmat, is in direct relation with meaning. To give importance to something or give something priority in meaning is to discipline. To create meanings is to create order. And finally, here, Isidore of Sevilla's text Institutionum Disciplinae is rearing children. Particular attention is paid to reading, understanding the meaning of words, accents, and meaning of words. Both the literal and the broader meaning could be distributed as in a green dictionary. Discipline first refers to flagellatio, punishment, körperliche Keisterung. As late as the 12th century, discipline is used to signify a massacre. For example, in the entry of discipline in Diderot's encyclopedia, this connection with flagellation is explained by saying that discipline also refers to a means with which to humiliate. Discipline se dit aussi de l'instrument avec lequel on se mortifie. First, refers from religious and fanatical motives of training or pacifying the body, or else discipline is indubitable of Christian origin, that is in one way or another a male stoical thing. Then discipline is further in direct connection with education, pedagogy, rearing, Zucht, order, militarism, and third set of meanings in green, discipline refers to a field of or area of inquiry. It means Fachgebiet, scientific or sport discipline. What is certainly needed are entirely new steps and important transformation of discipline unfolding over the centuries more or less convincingly in order to be able to show that discipline above all refers to a group and to a plurality of differing subjects, above all the individual within a group and community, one with others. And that self-discipline or Selbstzucht in Nietzsche's, for example, phrase, or self-education is only a deduced and reduced protocol of secondary importance. More precisely, self-discipline and self-correction, or self-punishment if you want, has as its goal always subsequent and once again new inclusion into a group and belonging to a group. Not the other way round. Since the ancient manual of discipline rules serve to include individuals into a community, thus constituting the community itself based on these acts. The rules, for example, that Isidore of Sevilla edits that refer to each individual child must needs imply the rules of the community and common life of all. Discipline leads to a community and is the preamble of communal life. The rules, for example, that Saint Victor reconstructs in well-known Disciplines, the book Disciplines, another form of living, the institutionnelle novitiorum, are directed as a production of knowledge that simultaneously disciplines we. That means, that simultaneously disciplines well. Scientia disciplina bonitas. What does this mean? Disciplining an individual for or her to become a member of a group is deduced from a partial disciplining of everything that refers to external matters, the behavior of the body, manners, and mores, how to walk, what is the discipline for Saint Victor, how to walk, talk, how to gesture, eat, drink, how to dress implies doing all this with others. In his lecture on pedagogy, Kant uses the German word dressieren that comes from the English to dress, and which is also the reason why the place where preachers change is called Presskammer and not Trostkammer. Being in control of one's own body, discipline, that is the discipline, is a necessary condition of being part of the group. War or military discipline is an excellent example here. In Encyclopédie, Diderot edits the following excerpt from the article military discipline. This phrase is for sure remake of Justus Lipsius' formula disciplina militaris. We shall see that such normativization of discipline, because discipline becomes norm, although discipline is not necessarily normative, that is, discipline is recognized as a protocol or power that is missing and is therefore insisted upon, a game that could be recognized as a normative. The same normativization of discipline we can find later in Durkheim, as well as definitely steering its meaning. I quote now this passage from Encyclopédie. Without discipline, an army would be no more than a heap of volunteers, incapable of being unified in common defense, seeking only to pillage and tending to disorder. It is discipline that unites them through officers' orders, to which they must show blind obeisance in all that concerns the service. It is not the number of soldiers that makes an army formidable, but rather the ability to be flexible and strong, and the creation of a single body moved by the same spirit of so many different members. Such were the small armies of the Greeks, who vanquished the Persian millions. In other words, it is to military discipline that the Greeks owe their victories over the Persians and the Romans their conquests. In order to be well disciplined, troops need to be relentlessly exercised. Even the best discipline is lost in rest. Discipline is, in that passage, at once subject and object, and this is, you can find it the same in Durkheim after. That means it is discipline that actively unites, as he said, it is discipline that unites them through officers' orders, and in the same time produces itself. Further, discipline is the spirit, in that passage also, that connects the body or bodies, that means the material, or the glue that holds the group members together. Further still, in the same passage, discipline is a pseudo-entity or new material that could replace real members or portions of a group in opposing another group. It is not, that's the knowledge, it is not the number of soldiers that counts, but the discipline they are arming. And finally, rest and repose dissociate members of a group, weaken and dissolve it. Obviously, discipline refers exclusively to joint work. That means where you have a joint work, you have discipline. The two final characteristics could be further specified, and also they complement one another. Discipline certainly depends on potential conflict or war with another group, or on competitive action with another team. In a celebrated text, the name of the text is The Discipline of Teams of March 93, recently republished in the Harvard Business Review. Katzenbach and Smith write, I quote, "We also found that teams and good performance are inseparable." Good performance. You cannot have one without the other. Teams produce discrete work products through the joint contributions of their members. This is what makes possible performance levels greater than the sum of all the individual bests of team members. Simply stated, a team is more than the sum of its parts. The origin of discipline is war. Ortega y Gasset writes, "The careful desire to avoid risk rules the entrepreneur's spirit, while the warrior is born of exceptional appetite for danger." Entrepreneur's spirit is espíritu industrial. Finally, what they have in common, that industrial spirit and warrior guerrero, is discipline, but was first invented by the warrior spirit and has been translated into man by way of its pedagogy. Or again, Ortega y Gasset, war discipline is one of the greatest strengths of history. Any other discipline, in particular one that assumes any sort of complex skill, issues from this spiritual order that man created for battle. Disciplina militar. Then, what is this kind of constant, that means constant communal activity of members of a group, really represent joint learning, mutual correction. Correction is some kind of, after Saint Augustine, discipline is more correction than punishment. You can find in literature this kind of transformation, as well as the construction of institutional or disciplinary rules or institutional content that can be learned and taught, transferred, imparted to future followers and subsequent members of the group, thus performing its regeneration. In a word, if there are disciplined performances, this is John Rawls' phrase, if there is a discipline in a group or among group member, within each member of a group, that the problem is there. There still remain questions about where discipline is lacking and what place is ought to take within a group or an army. Where is the discipline? If we have all of this, then there is a kind of disciplinary power of a group. Then there is a group as such, because discipline constitutes a new entity that is an institution, and in the same time there is a knowledge. A discipline is a field or area of inquiry, subject and object. In the second part of this extraordinary sentence in Encyclopedia, I quote, it is discipline that unites them through officers' orders, to which they must show blind obedience in all that concerns the service, apart from the hierarchy established by discipline. Discipline is always, but it's not important for now. That means the sentence subject between the officer's orders and the blind obeisance of the subjects. Service is the word that applies to all members of the group regardless of their position in the hierarchy of the group. We also see the discursive character of social discipline, that is, in this case, the institution of the army. Although discipline is de facto scattered through the location of connections of rules and relations, properly uttered orders, obedience or listening, blind but not deaf and probably not dumb, the multitudes of bodies that these speech acts move and temporarily hold them together in a given place, it seems that above all it possesses institutional capacity. That discipline possesses institutional capacity. How should we define this scattered status of discipline, and in what way give it its categorical nature, perhaps social categorical nature and position? This is the task that would perhaps first have to again amend some of the conceptual classification of Michel Foucault, while entirely respecting his sincere anti-institutionalism. To this point, I would like to immediately offer 2 points regarding Foucault's understanding of the institution and, in the same time, discipline. First, that Foucault's thematization of the institution and his problem with the institution and discipline appears at the beginning of the 80s when he first mentions biopolitics with his faultless analysis of liberalism. That is when he constructs the field of biopolitics. The appearance of biopolitics implies anti-institutionalism. During the 1970 course, Le Pouvoir Psychiatrique, Foucault insists, let us be very anti-institutionalist. In La Volonté du Savoir, biopolitics appears at the same time as Foucault's use of the word institution. In his 71 discussion with Chomsky, when speaking of the family and state, Foucault says, I quote, "It seems to me that in a society such as ours, the true political task is to criticize the play of institutions, that are apparently neutral and independent, and that criticize and attack them with such political violence that will be performed clandestinely on them until they are unmasked and we are able to struggle against them. The second point is that this Foucault's anti-institutionalism, Foucault is a maximalist, institutional fundamentalist, or transcendental institutionalist, this is Armatia's terms, does not recognize the idea of good or just institution, is entirely atypical of the French tradition. Not only because of French institutionalists and jurists Renard and Oriou, or the French revolutionary tradition and Robespierre and Saint-Just, I quote Saint-Just, everything not yet institutionalized is the enemy and anti-revolutionary in essence, or Robespierre, there is nothing outside institutions, but also, not just French tradition, but also due to his contemporaries, example Lacan, Deleuze, Derrida, who showed each of their own way trust in reform of institutions, construction of new institutions, or counter-institution, joint struggle for institution, etc. Is it then really discipline that institutionalizes the institution? Or, in other words, is discipline actually the practice of the institution? In a conversation from 1977 in which Foucault, in a rather undisciplined way and without clear intention, introduces the difference between episteme and dispositive or apparatus. The first is specifically discursive, episteme, while the other, dispositif, while the other is more heterogeneous, both discursive and non-discursive. In that same conversation, to the amazement of his interlocutors, Foucault defines the institution by fitting it into so-called non-discursive or silent formations. Non-discursive institution as non-discursive or silent formation. You can find this interview online. This is Le Jeu de Michel Foucault from 1977. When he said that institutions are non-discursive or silent formations, Jean Alain Miller interjects clearly the institution is, of course, discursive. I quote now Foucault. The term institution is generally applied to any kind of more or less constrained, learned behavior. Constrained, this is constrained, learned behavior. This is discipline. Anything that functions in a society as a system of constraint and which isn't an utterance. In short, the entire field of non-discursive social is an institution. Non-discursive social. Again, Foucault, if you take Gabriel's architectural plan for the military school together with the actual construction of the school, how is one to say what is discursive and what institutional? That would only interest me if the building didn't conform to the plan, etc., etc. Where is the problem? The problem is le social non discursif, c'est l'institution. The entire field of the non-discursive social is an institution. If discipline functions as an institutional practice, this sentence could be entirely ignored as incorrect and wholly unacceptable. One possibility then of approaching discipline and its better understanding would certainly be the thematization of widespread resistance to discipline in general. It seems to me that various figures of resistance and opposition to discipline does necessarily imply a revalorization of certain disciplinary protocols and an attempt at a more precise naming and conceptualizing or locating discipline, or an amendment of the idea of discipline, the establishment of creative discipline, the power to inscribe something else into discipline. These last three variations, this creative discipline or the inscribe something else into discipline, come from Peter Eisenman, guest of the center 1.5 years, with whom I attempted last year to construct a sketch of a small joint paper about discipline and architectural discipline, and with whom I have analyzed many of the problems that appear in this text. All his formulations can be found in the introduction of his book Palladio Vitriol, published last year. If we assume that various protocols of discipline and discipline, for example coercion, pressure, constraints, violence, are found first of all on the border from the individual towards the collective or group, then resistance to discipline is symmetrical to resistance to the institution and institutions, or some forms of this. Such resistance can be, of course, entirely caricatural and absurd, sometimes, of course, because sometimes it is completely illusory and inappropriate to become engaged against joint learning. If you are against discipline, you are against joint learning, or you are against studying together. For example, that kind of illusion, or I don't know, violence you can find in Amal Andros, the newly elected dean of the School of Architecture of Columbia University. She said in a recent interview to the magazine Log that her daughter attends, I quote, the most progressive preschool in the East Village. There is a big sign at the entrance that says, "We do not believe in this." And she continues, "I feel the same way about the notion of discipline." Andros is here entirely unwittingly and awareness confronting the institution of architecture as such, that is the history of her own discipline. You can find in Vitruvius that architect must have both a natural gift, that means in ingeniosum in Latin, and also the readiness to learn. And in Latin is disciplinam docilem. Ingenium sine disciplina, or there is nothing. Ingenium sine disciplina is nothing. Disciplina sine ingenio is nothing. Also, it can such resistance against institutions sometimes be very cynical and dangerous in its frivolity, but also, and this is interesting for us, it can be just as much entirely inspirational and promising when insufficiently clear and justified. In any case, resistance to discipline has a long and complicated history, and its origin is certainly in resentment to violent pedagogical practices, torture of weak and beating of children, prisoners, the ill, etc., etc. I quote here two resistance to discipline and two simultaneous insistences on discipline as a short introduction, that will be the end, to a fragment from Emil Durkheim, with which I will close this sketch of a potential and much more complicated justification and defense of discipline as a condition of joint work and good functioning of a group. These two calls to discipline and disciplining really repeat Durkheim's endeavors that are always on the horizon, which is also, I assume, the reason Werner constructed the title of these talks in French, as discipline is Durkheim's and our, of course, our own thing. In February of 1970, Antonio Gramsci writes a few fragments in the publication of the youth section of the Piemontese Socialist Party, La Città Futura. His aim is to educate and form, educare e formare, young socialists and teach them political discipline, solidarity and life organized by the party, alla vita organizzata del partito. In a brilliant text entitled Gli Indifferenti, he speaks of his hatred towards the neutral, and the indifferent, and to their indiscipline, concluding his text with Vivo sono partigiano, perciò odio chi non parteggia, odio gli indifferenti. I hate indifference. I hate because they are not part of it, they are not partigiani. In a brief fragment, Disciplina e Libertà, he says that disciplining is the condition to be independent and free. Disciplinarsi è rendersi indipendenti e liberi. While in a short text, La Disciplina, he evokes Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book, and the discipline presents in a strong bourgeois state where all obey dutifully. I quote Gramsci, bourgeois discipline is the only force that can maintain the bourgeois state of affairs. What is necessary is discipline opposed to discipline. Bisogna a disciplina contrapporre disciplina. But bourgeois discipline is a mechanical and authoritarian thing, while socialist discipline is autonomous and spontaneous. Autonomous and spontaneous. The second fragment is the incessant and still unthematized call or cry for so-called popular discipline that we find in the last decade in various interviews of Alain Badiou. Here is a brief fragment from 2008 published in Critical Inquiry. I quote, I think the Leninist party was at bottom a military model, and for good reason. This is not a criticism. Lenin was obsessed with one question, how to win the war. The question of discipline is therefore fundamental, just as it is for an army. You cannot win the war if people do whatever they like, if there is no unity, and so on. The problem for emancipatory politics today, however, is to invent non-military model of discipline. We need a popular discipline. I would even say, as I have many times, that, I quote, those who have nothing have only their discipline. Those who have nothing have only their discipline. What is discipline? He or she has possibility to be part of it. That is the discipline. Discipline is like as in Leibniz, this is monada with a window. This is window. Discipline is the window to the quality. I quote again, the poor, those with no financial or military means, those with no power, all they have is their discipline, their capacity to act together. Have is their discipline, this is capacity to act together. This discipline is already a form of organization, that's why. This discipline is already a form of organization. And the question is whether all discipline can be reduced to a military model, the model that dominated the first part of the 20th century, and also how can we invent the same idea as in Gramsci, exercise or experiment with today, after all, is an age of experimentation and non-military discipline. All of these are difficult tasks and complicated suggestions. Each of these attempts to transform discipline while also defend its basic protocols carries the endeavor to categorically structure discipline and render it universal. If we read Durkheim 1902-1903 Sorbonne lectures today, published as a moral education, the Education Morale, as a true manifest of conceptualizing discipline, it is truly not certain whether discipline has anything to do with morality or whether it ought to have anything to do with morality. He said, I quote, the first element of morality, spirit of discipline. However, Durkheim thematized indiscipline and discipline in the context of the group and its difference to the undisciplined mob or full sans discipline group and mob on the other side. He thematized the significance of consciousness of belonging to a group which complements discipline that at once orders and contains. What is the quality or characteristic, principal characteristic of discipline? This is discipline at once régularise et elle contient, orders and contains. These moments are today, it seems to me, most important in the reconstruction of discipline. A few years before writing this book, Durkheim is thinking about equality and social justice. Does discipline mean that simply being together, close enough to one another, implies equality and thus justice? Or conversely, is a society equal when people relate also in disciplined manner to each other as equals? This is not an issue of a just or equitable distribution of some kind of currency of egalitarian justice. That means this is not discipline to distribute currency, currency of justice. Nor, on the other hand, that, I quote, owners disciplining non-owners. That is the answer capitalism offers to Michael Walzer's question, who disciplines whom? Who disciplines whom? From the book Spheres of Justice. At issue are relations or acting. At issue is discipline, which is beyond domination, hierarchy, exploitation and social exclusion. Let me remind you of a fragment penned by Emil Durkheim in 1897. Here too, it is a question of discipline and only discipline. During the 28th March of 1973 course La Société Punitive, Foucault insists on this passage, and I quote Foucault, we should reread what he said in Suicide, Durkheim, regarding anomie. What characterizes the social as such in contrast with the political, which is the level of decisions, and the economic, which is the level of determination, is nothing other than the system of disciplines, of constraints. I quote now Durkheim at the end. Truly, the nearer this ideal equality, égalité idéale, were approached, the less social restraint will be necessary. But it is only a matter of degree. One sort of heredity will always exist, that of natural talent, intelligence, taste, scientific, artistic, literary or industrial ability, courage and manual dexterity are gifts received by each of us as birth, as the heir of the wealth receives his capital, or as the nobleman formerly received his title and function. A moral discipline will therefore still be required to make those less favored by nature accept the lesser advantages which they owe to the chains of birth. Pour faire accepter. Accept the lesser advantages. This is the condition, first of all. Shall it be demanded that all have an equal share and that no advantage be given those more useful and deserving? But then there would have to be a discipline far stronger to make this accept a treatment merely equal to that of the mediocre and incapable. Again, pour faire accepter, 2 times. But like the one first mentioned, this discipline can be useful only if considered, condition. This discipline can be useful only if considered just by the people subject to it. When it is maintained, again condition, when it is maintained only by custom and force, peace and harmony are illusory. Conditions always follow discipline. For example here, pour faire accepter, considérer quand les règles se maintiennent, etc. Anyway, we should reread carefully what Durkheim said, and we will certainly find very good justification or justifications to forget Foucault's anti-institutionalism today.